Welcome to this Honda bonus episode where we go through some of the comments you guys gave us on this build-off and have a little fun with them.
First off, we wanted to give you guys a humongous thank you. I think this series so far has been one of our best, and it couldn't have been without all of you commenting, watching, and supporting us. There was an overwhelming amount of amazing comments in terms of how much people liked this video series.
It's Honda's PT, so we knew that people would love it, and we obviously both love Hondas ourselves, so we kind of felt like it would work, and it seemed to work, didn't it?
It certainly did. And what we wanted to do is shoot this kind of episode. This is certainly not a normal episode for us, but we figured there was just so many comments from, good to bad to confusing. We thought, you know what, it would be kind of entertaining to air some of them and talk about some of the comments and answer some questions. And so, of course, post in the comments after you've watched this video whether this is, you like this, whether we should continue to do this after every series, or it kind of felt like, it wasn't the right thing to do. So I'm just gonna get right into it here. This has been my favorite series so far. The Miata series was also amazing. Love watching the builds on stuff that is attainable for most enthusiasts, but overall, the content is top notch.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the more overwhelming comments that we got. It was just all the positive feedback that people really enjoyed the series, and we appreciate that, guys. We know it's not always natural to post something positive.
Yes.
People tend to only post things when they see something that they think is done wrong, but so we do really appreciate you taking the time just to post something encouraging like that, because it really does give us a boost. And there are times where we need a boost.
That's right, yeah.
This YouTube life can be a grind, so it is really valuable to us. So thank you very much for the positive comments. Another thing we get asked a lot, not just in this series, but in general, even on social media, is this question, which is, Hi Speed Academy, love your content, and you guys seem very knowledgeable in your work. Do you also service customer vehicles, i.e. general repairs and performance upgrades? I'm looking for a local shop that's reliable. And the answer to that is no, we do not do that. We're not certified mechanics. We are not insured to work on your car.
And we just don't have the time. Simply put, this business is built out to be a YouTube business, not a mechanic shop.
Yeah.
And we've got a ton of great people in the area that we recommend anybody local to go to. NV Auto is one of them. So, if you're looking for work, certainly shoot us a message. We can certainly recommend someone in the area, but we do not work on cars. This is a kind of an interesting one. Let me make a video where I claim to have found or bought a Type R for cheaper than anybody else. I guess you guys think you're clever. And you always get this amount of a certain amount of commenters that don't believe what we purchased this car for, or other cars, or that we've kind of fabricated all these stories and this car wasn't crashed, or we crashed
the
it.
Fake drama. There was none of that in this series.
No, and we try to be as transparent as possible. We also had a bunch of questions or comments about the budget of $17,000, this wasn't real, or the $2,000 Civic wasn't real, and it's how much more clear could we have been? We literally included every price for the parts that we used.
And we told you the backstory of both cars and how we got them from those prices. We know that it's not something you can just go out and buy tomorrow at that price.
No, of course not.
But we've both been in the car world for 20 years. We have a large network of friends, and it was that network in both cases that put these cars in our lap at a price that was unbelievable to some of you, but was very much the case. So sorry if you have a hard time believing that, but it is what it is. Build your network, guys, and you might get some cheap cars too.
And the one thing I should point out, we did miss one price, and that was the cost of paint for the EK
the front
aero stuff
the
with the rear spoiler.
So
we did miss that. That was
the
one
over
item.
Budget anyway.
Yeah, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it was only $200, so it wouldn't have made a huge difference. But we did miss that. Otherwise, I think we were pretty perfect in terms of including everything in the budget.
Yeah, and we had lots of people trying to egg us on to cheat on the budget, don't include the tires because Continental sponsored it. Don't include the bodywork on the Integra because it doesn't affect performance. But we wanted to show you the true costs of building these cars from the moment we bought them till the moment we took them to the racetrack. So that's what you got there, and I think it was a good process overall. I think people really liked seeing the transparency.
And it is real. It really does go to show how expensive it is to build a car today. It's not cheap.
No.
It is certainly not cheap.
As you guys know, inflation is real. One thing that we could do better next time, though, and I saw this by just going through all the comments today, is that at the beginning of each episode, we needed to refresh them on what the budget was. Because there are a lot of questions like, oh, what does that number in the bottom corner mean? And, oh, is this the cost of the build? So it's like, we could have recapped in like 30 seconds at the beginning of each episode what the challenge was. So that's maybe something we can do moving forward.
Sure.
I think that would clean it up a little.
I think there's actually a comment that I have here about this being a $2,000 budget build where the person didn't watch the previous episode, and it turned into a situation where it was like, oh, how for $2,000 you haven't built anything. This is full clickbait.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, the car was purchased for $2,000. If you had watched the video previously, you would have known that.
Yeah.
And truthfully, how do you think any car in today's day will be built for $2,000? Like, you can't even buy a car for $2,000, let alone do a K-swap or put wheels and tires on a car. Like $2,000.
You can't get an oil change on your Porsche for $2,000.
You just can't do anything anymore. So it's funny to read those types of comments where people are so far out in left field and really don't have the context of the video series because they haven't watched the one prior to that. And part of me doesn't want to refresh them to go watch the videos. Like, why do we have to spoon feed you every time? So the next one here is, well, stopped watching this one 5 minutes in. A pile of bad K-tuned parts where OEM Honda solutions can and should be used. Take that Honda plastic intake manifold gasket off and throw it in the trash,
everybody.
As you just offset your injector spray. Run a factory-style metal one.
Oh, yeah.
This one triggered me, and there was here's another quick comment. I'm going to keep saying it until it's addressed. K-tuned is low quality copy parts, poor business practices, China parts, support companies like Track Tough and Hybrid Racing. This stuff really annoys me. Those types of people that are making those comments have had an issue.
Of course.
And 95% of the time, issues stem from improper installation, not reading the instructions, that kind of stuff. And then people get pissed off. They probably call K-Tune, and K-Tune says, well, you installed it wrong, and the person is hard-headed enough and says, nope, too bad. Like, we have now run a full track day with no issues. We've run K-Tune parts for a extremely long time,
at least a
and
decade.
have had no issues with them. So that's kind of my gripe.
And it's all designed in Canada. It's not knockoff parts. They design their own parts. In fact, a lot of the parts you see on the marketplace are knockoffs of what K-Tune designed originally.
Yeah.
John at K-Tune has been the irony guy for like 30 years.
Oh, I've known John for 25 years, right?
I mean, he literally invented these track bar setups. Like, he's an innovator in the Honda scene.
Yeah.
And if you don't know that and you're on here bashing K-Tune, well, I'm sorry, but you just don't know your Honda history. So do your research on that. And yes, there are other companies out there that are very good, like Hybrid and Acuity, and they design their own parts and do a good job of it too. But K-Tune's local to us. We have a personal relationship with those guys, and they build good parts.
That's it. Yeah. Well, and that brings me to my, next point. Yes, we could have used a lot more used parts. We could have used OEM Honda parts. I think I mentioned this before. We are not building these cars to be as cheap as possible. We were building them to a number. Budget. And we want to build cars that represent reliable track cars that can still be used on the street. And when you cut costs, when you use old parts, it bites you in the butt like 9 times out of 10. It certainly does happen. I'm not saying you can't do that, but we want to build high quality cars, and doing so is expensive. That's why some people were blown away at the figure that it costs to build these cars, right? But it ultimately comes down to, we're trying to build fast cars that are built right to a certain extent. Our motto.
And we were both broke college students once upon a time and bought used parts and put them on our cars and had them fail and learned that lesson the hard way. So it's not like we're doing this because we're hard-headed. We're doing it because we've experienced the other side of that, and we just know that when you budgeted for it, buy the good stuff and buy it new. It's just
buy the best example car you can, and always spend money on the key core good parts, right?
Absolutely.
And by the way, this whole thing of the Honda intake manifold gasket, which for those of you that don't know, it's like a 5 mil thick gasket made out of almost like a plastic.
It's a heat barrier.
And it's a heat barrier. And this guy, said that it offsets your injector enough where it's going to affect the way the car runs. The idea that that gasket would affect that, like Honda is a professional company. If they built the car, or they build the ECUs that you tune your car, and you think they would not know that?
They land speed raced their Hondas for a few decades. I think they know.
And it just goes to show the misinformation that's out there that causes this kind of like rapid spread, right? Where people are like, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that. Which brings me to my next comment, which this one is for you, DP, because there was a ton of people that said you cannot use 7590
the
gear oil in the K Series gearbox.
Yes.
And people were triggered.
Oh, they were fully triggered.
It's too thick.
Oh, yeah.
You're going to blow up a gearbox.
It's a
and
disaster.
well, you know, we probably lucked out now because we've made this track day without blowing up the gearbox with that stuff in there.
It's a miracle. And so let me tell you a little story, everybody. Back in my Honda, K-Swap EG racing days, I knew that the K gearboxes were a little fragile.
Yes.
So I talked to my friends at Compass 360 Racing, who are one of the biggest teams in IMSA and have been for the last 20 years. And at the time, they were racing Honda Civics, K-powered Honda Civics, in what was then called the Continental Streetcar Series, is now IMSA. Anyway, like touring car racing in the IMSA series. And they had found a formula of gear oil that made their gearboxes last like 4 times longer than anybody else in that series. And these are endurance races, like 3 hours, sometimes longer.
And they're stock gearboxes.
Stock gearboxes. So what they were using was Redline 75W90 with heavy duty shockproof added into it.
Yeah.
In other words, they were using a very thick formula, which had added tremendous reliability to their gearboxes. When they told me that, I thought, okay, these guys know what they're talking about. I did the same in my car, and I raced my car for, I think, 5 years without ever touching the gearbox. And everyone else I knew who was racing K-Series around me, running OE oil, were changing gears and synchros out 2 or 3 times a season.
Yeah.
So that's how much reliability it added by going to the heavier oil. So I have run that formula in every K-Series box that we've built since then, and we've had 0 issues. Yeah. So for all of you who want to actually have your K-Series gearbox last longer, 75W90, be Valvoline or otherwise, and maybe a little shockproof in there too.
And I think we should point out that, this is from a track racing perspective. I think people, this kind of stuff happens where somebody dumps this in, has it in their street car, doesn't let everything warm up, goes, rips, bangs a couple gears and blows it up, and then it's like, oh, it's too thick. Like that's where I think this kind of, false information also comes from.
Obviously, our valve cover treatments triggered some of the keyboard warriors out there, and fair enough. I mean, we did have a pretty big fail on the Type R one in terms of that wrinkle red not working out too well. But a lot of people were asking why we didn't sandblast or vapor hone those covers versus chemically stripping them. And there's some pretty good reasons why, isn't there?
Yeah, like real quick, oh God, over 10 years ago, I watched an engine blow up, a 4G63, a rather high-priced engine built by our buddy Jay from JDM Ego. And the reason why that engine blew up was because he had his valve cover blasted, and then they didn't clean it out properly, and he put it on the car, and eventually media got into the motor, ruined the bearings, bam, engine done. And from then on, I have never trusted blasting valve covers because of that. It's the same thing with our vapor honer. That media will trap itself in corners, especially in like valve covers are baffled, and that's a huge problem, right? So anything that can trap media somewhere that you can't get to and clean, to me, it's just not worth the risk. This way, just like chemically stripping valve covers is the way to go and the safe way to go if you don't want to take the chance. Now, there's a ton of people that do blast valve covers with good success.
Yeah. People were triggered, by the way, when I poured the thick stuff on the Integra one, and then I said, as the instructions say, just brush it one way, and then I brush it multiple ways right away. People were like, you idiot! And watching the video, I said the same thing about myself, but I put it on so thick, I was just trying to smear it around a little more by going back and forth, so I was just trying to distribute the product, but I appreciate the negativity, everyone. It was good for a laugh.
So here's a good tip, actually, that I didn't even know. When we were fixing the rusted brake line and it was dripping, somebody pointed out that if you depress the brake pedal all the way down, it's going to stop that leak, because essentially it's plugging the line from having brake fluid come to it.
Right.
So that's a wicked tip. We appreciate it. There's a bunch of you that posted that, and from here on out, I'm going, anytime I have an issue like that, the brake pedal's going down, and it's gonna save us so much agony of like this dripping line.
I thought this was an interesting comment, and it makes sense if you're not that familiar with K-swaps. A lot of people were like, why is the engine so far forward in the engine bay, and is it going to ruin weight distribution, make the car nose heavy and handle poorly? And I think what you're seeing there is basically an optical illusion. Because the intake manifold's at the front of the engine bay now, it makes it look very front heavy. But if you look at where the engine's positioned, it's exactly where the engine's positioned from Honda. It's pretty much the middle of the engine is in the midline of the front axle, because the axles have to line up with the hubs. So the bulk of the weight of the engine is obviously in the long block, and it is right over the midline of that front axle line, as necessitated by axle angles. So it looks front heavy because the intake manifold's at the front. You got this big void in the back because the exhaust manifold sort of is hidden back there. But weight distribution is not really affected. Ks are a little bit heavier than Bs, but it's a very small amount.
So here's another question. Why did you put foil in the wheel wells? And by that he means in an episode where we were mounting the Continental tires onto the Buddy Club wheels, and we put the wheel weights on. When we put the wheel weights on, we came in with aluminum foil tape and covered the wheel weights, and people were like, why are you doing that? And that is just plain and simple because if you take a car to the racetrack without putting an extra amount or tape on it to hold the weights down, it does end up falling off because the tire and wheel get too hot, the brake, all that like surrounding heat melts the glue off of the wheel weight.
Yep, it's that simple. So here's one that, frankly, I'm a little disappointed in you guys about. I thought your Honda knowledge went deeper than this, but when we were putting that 24.5 mil hard race rear sway bar on the Type R, we got a ton of comments from guys saying, oh, why didn't you put the subframe brace in? And the truth is, the Type Rs don't need the brace. They actually have a reinforced subframe to begin with because they come with bigger front and rear sway bars from the factory. So you don't need that on the Type R. You do need it on your Civics, and I think maybe
just like we did on this car.
Like we did on this one. And I'm also going to be honest, I didn't know that the Type R had a reinforced subframe either. When we opened up the sway bar box, we're like, where's the subframe brace? Then we did the research. We spoke to our buddy Chris at Stage 4 Motorsports, and he's like, yeah, hey dummy, the Type R doesn't need the brace, it's already reinforced.
During our dyno video, there was a bunch of comments that people loved the old style VTEC crossover sound.
Right.
Nothing beats a B for that crossover.
Popping at 6K.
Now, here's my question. Is it because it comes on so late in the RPM range? Like if you shift that VTEC crossover down to 4,500, does it still sound as good? Like, because most of the Ks that we build are the VTEC crossovers like in the 4,000, like 4,500 RPM.
Yes. And you have iVTEC, which changes the sound of it as well. It does soften it a little when you lower it on the Bs, so it doesn't pop quite as dramatically, I guess because there's just not as much velocity going on at a lower RPM. But it still is quite a dramatic sound change from like small lobe to big lobe. That's just the nature of a non-iVTEC or traditional VTEC versus an iVTEC motor with the Ks. They have a much softer sound at crossover.
The Honda hate was low. I'm gonna admit there was so much Honda love, but there were some people, for example, that said, imagine paying almost $20,000 for not even 200 wheel horsepower and a 14-second quarter mile time. It's like, whoa, this car did make over 200 wheel.
It did. And it would go probably 13s quite easily.
I think so.
I think so. Would easily be 13s.
But it's just interesting that there are people out there that think this, and rightly so. I get it. On paper, when you look at the amount of money spent to build these cars, the fact that they're like, tin can Hondas, they're commuter cars, I get it. That may seem odd, but once you drive a Honda and you see the magic and the fun and everything else that
the braking, the cornering speed, lightness goes a long way. The double wishbone suspension.
You would never ever make a comment like this.
No, you wouldn't. My dad was a Corvette guy. I grew up in a Corvette family. We were taking his C6 Corvette to the track and my EG to the track. And guess what? He just stopped bringing the Corvette and we shared the EG because once he had a taste of that Honda life,
see, there you go.
Too. So try it out, guys. Don't knock it before you try it. All right, here's a few things that were popular comments on the Type R that I think are worth mentioning because guess what, guys? There's going to be more Type R on the channel coming up right after this episode.
That's right.
The next upload you see will be on the Type R for reasons you will understand when you watch that episode. And one of the things that triggered people was the fact that we didn't paint the calipers on that car. One guy was even like, oh, why didn't you paint the center hats on the rotors? I'm like, dude, they were brand new rotors up front. We're not gonna paint those. And in the rear, like, you don't even see them once the wheel goes back on. And yes, this was a budget build, and we could have painted the calipers for basically nothing. It was a time thing, ultimately. We were trying to get these builds done quickly. Again, for reasons that you'll understand when you see the next episode on the Type R, we were up against a deadline, so we had to hustle hard.
This one also made me chuckle. That's just a sad state of affairs when you piece together a rusted brake line when you said you had a whole day to replace the line on a car you plan on running at the track. Great looking car and motor, but no way I would feel safe those brake lines if they weren't properly fixed. Good luck. This person clearly has never dropped a gas tank to do a brake line or fuel lines.
Not a one-day job, that's for sure.
It's not a one-day job, and that's the whole thing. Once you disturb those lines,
oh man,
all the lines have to be done. So it's not just the brake lines, it's the fuel lines. And if you look at these Hondas, they kind of like tuck under the front subframe. So there's just, it's a lot of work.
Huge job.
And there's so many people that were triggered by the fact that I didn't replace the whole line. That's the reason for it. And that fix, it doesn't magically just like explode, you know? I'm not gonna be driving on the track and it's gonna break. More likely to break is one of the other lines or the fuel lines that may have been disturbed when I was working on them. But the fix itself is a solid one. Like, we tested it, you drive it around, if it's not leaking, like that's what you'll get. You'll get a leak before it just like magically, you know, blows up on the racetrack and I get no brakes and I go crashing, you know, into a wall.
It's never gonna be a catastrophic failure, just you might have a slow leak, which we don't have. It's been to the track, worked well. There was a lot of comments about are we going to give away the Type R? Are we going to sell the Type R? Can I buy the Type R? And the answer to that is, say it with me, PT. No. Keeping it forever, guys. Forever car.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. We know these cars are so special and we don't really want to get rid of it. We love driving it. It just kind of like takes us back. So it'll be, you know, in the stable for as long as we want. As
long as we got heartbeats, that car is sticking around here.
Oh, this is a good one. There was a bunch of comments. So I did that Type R conversion, the 4-lug for the Civic EK here, brake setup, and I used the mini rotors. And a lot of people said what will happen is the rotors, because if you guys look closely, they have a larger diameter opening over the studs, and a lot of people said those will like rotate and cause the studs to break off eventually. There's actually somebody that produces a kit. I think it's called 1320 Performance. There's these little rings that just go in and they adapt it and they center the rotor.
It's not a bad idea.
It's not a bad idea. We have run a couple cars. The EK Civic Coupe that we built had this exact same setup, and we ran countless,
probably 20 lapping days on that
thing. God, hundreds of laps without any failure on that. So I'm still having a hard time understanding how those would move at such a rapid pace if the wheels torque down. I can understand, you know, if you're running slicks or something crazy, but I don't know. Anyways, I don't necessarily think it's a must. It's surely probably a cheap good to have. So if you're doing that conversion, maybe think about it.
I like this tip too, everyone. And by like it, I mean, don't ever do this. This guy says, I used to just bend the knuckles for gaining camber. It raced well. You bent the knuckles. Wow. Okay, first of all,
that doesn't even make sense. They're cast.
Yeah, bending a cast part seems super sketchy. You've now put stress fractures in it, and you have no actual control of how much camber you've put in it, because you're bending it how exactly? Are you heating it up? Are you forging it?
Maybe he was cheating in like a stock class series, and that was like the only way to do it.
Yeah, well, I know with torsion beam guys, they would bend the rear to gain camber for, you know, racing stuff like Honda Fits and Nissan Micros and stuff, because those are torsion beam in the rear or solid beam. They would bend that stuff, but bending a front knuckle or a rear knuckle, don't do it, kids.
And here's another one that kind of makes you scratch your head. who the F uses a torque wrench to install spark plugs?
Any technician worth their salt, basically?
Yeah. If you don't want to strip your cylinder head,
Aluminum,
have the potential
easy
of
to
that, if you're a seasoned mechanic, sure, go ahead. But for people out there, like, just do the procedure. When we built our Ford Mustang, the 3-valve, there was a technical service bulletin where spark plugs were being over-torqued, and then they were snapping off in the heads, or just,
there were 2-piece spark plug, it would break in two.
It would break, and then it was like, think of the nightmare that you have to go through to try to extract a spark plug, and think of how quick and easy it is to torque your spark plug.
Yeah.
So pro tip, always torque your spark plugs. All right, to start wrapping this up, I had an email come in from a fan, Zoran, out of Italy, and he is a rather tall guy.
Okay.
I think he said he was like 6'5" or something, and what he has done is he moved the OEM steering wheel back, I think, like 4 or 5 inches. He created a spacer with a company out of Italy, and it's moved the steering wheel back, the OE steering wheel, to a point where he is now comfortable, and he's moved his seat back as well, which is a super cool thing to see people, innovating, because these cars are small. If you're a tall guy trying to fit into it, it's certainly a bit of an issue,
They're not
right?
Miata small.
No. The Type Rs are good. They don't have sunroofs, but still, if you're like a super large guy, and if you're interested in something like that, then certainly shoot me an email. And I'll pass on his contact info for the few of you that are looking for that kind of setup. And last but not least, we have these 2 cars back here that there was a bunch of comments on. What happened to the GTR and Supra? Well, first of all, there was this scheduling conflict, like Dave said. There is a series coming on this, and for those of you that have been following us along on Instagram will know we had to go to a Grid Life event, so we had to get these cars done. But mainly it's just too hot in the summer to go and try to do a proper track battle with 2 highly tuned turbocharged cars. Especially the Supras. Supras were never known for their track prowess. After our 2J ZM3 couldn't complete a full hot lap in the middle of summer.
Talking smack about the 2J overheating.
We'll see. Trust me, the GTR is not going to see any overheating issues. It's not the problem. The Supra is certainly.
The driver is going to be overheated once he gets whooped by the Supra, though. Huh?
Man, those are tall words. But so we will come back to those cars once the heat kind of subsides, and
it has been a furnace of a summer here. The humidity is like 1,000%, and it's been like 90+ degrees Fahrenheit here all summer. It's been brutal. We look sweaty because we are sweaty.
That's right.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting those cars out in September when the weather does tend to cool down a bit here, and looking forward to whooping some GTR ass. So stay tuned, guys.
Which is not going to happen, but thank you guys for watching. Certainly, as I mentioned in the beginning, post in the comments. Let us know if you enjoyed this type of video. Was the pacing good? Was it too long? Would you like it longer? Too short? I'm sure the YouTube numbers will give us a good indicator, but we certainly want to hear from you as well. So that is it, and get ready, because the Type R is coming back, and it is going to be a track build, and it's gonna be epic.